First of all, I want to bring up a poster that I completed for the Graduate Research Symposium at Duquesne University. Like I said, we're going to be taking a look at a large-scale project. This is 48 inches wide by 36 inches high. Now, before we begin creating a document in Photoshop, we need to know that there's a difference between creating a web document or a graphic image versus creating a document for print. So let's come up to the File menu here and create a new document, or Command-N. We're going to call this one Poster, okay? And we're going to come down to our dimensions. We want to make sure that for print they're measured in inches. And for this poster we wanted 48 inches wide by 36 inches high. And our resolution should be 300 pixels per square inch. And for now we're going to leave our color scale on RGB, but keep in mind some printing presses do require 4-color printing, and in that case you would want to make sure that your color scale is set to CMYK. So once we have our file named and our dimensions set, resolution correct, we're going to hit OK, and we're going to see a blank template pop up. So this is what I began with in Photoshop. Now, I didn't just begin layering things in here. What I did was I started sketching ideas in my journal, and what I came up with were these repeating themes that eventually became modules. So as I completed these sketches, these modules started to appear in further detail, and it was a matter of arranging elements on the poster itself until I had the correct balance. Now, earlier I mentioned the importance of staying organized, and I mentioned labeling layers and creating groups as being the main way of staying organized in these larger projects. So this is our layers window, and it contains the master list of all of the layers in the entire project. And naturally it's ordered from top to bottom, so whatever's at the top of the list is layered physically on the top of the canvas. Whatever's on the bottom is layered underneath all of the other layers. Now anytime we want to add a layer, let's say we want to drag a new picture in or add a graphic image, all we have to do is open this file in Photoshop and then drag and drop it onto the canvas that we're working on. Now, Photoshop will recognize the action automatically and generate a whole new layer. So I have this image on the desktop, one that I was considering using in the poster, image 1263. I want to come into my File menu and select Open, or the keyboard Command O, and on my desktop I'm going to make that my selection and hit Open. And that's going to open up that image within Photoshop. You see it has its own layer window. It begins every image as just a locked background layer, but you can use things like the marquee or lasso tool to make selections on the screen and create new layers. So let's use our marquee tool here. You have a rectangular marquee, elliptical, couple of row and column tools. Because I'm making a circular selection, I'm going to use the elliptical marquee. Now you have to use your imagination here. Imagine a square box that contains this circle. You're going to go to the top left corner of that box, and while holding the Shift key you're going to click and drag. And what that's going to do is create a perfect circle. Now it wasn't perfectly centered, but that's okay because I can move my selection around to be centered on the part of the image that I want. You can also use the keyboard arrows up, down, left, and right to nudge the selection. And once you get it just right, just the way you want it, Command C to copy and Command V to paste will create a new layer. And as you notice, it creates a pretty generic label of just layer and then a number, and that's what we want to change. I can't emphasize enough the importance of naming your layers as you go and labeling them clearly as to what they are. because this is essential for structuring and navigating any project, especially something that's large scale. So now that we've created our new layer, we need to name it. And what we're going to do is slowly double click on the layer name, and that's going to bring up an editing box. We can then call it whatever we want. I'm going to call this mandala. Hit enter, and it is now changed. What's nice about this, when I come up to my selection tool here, you can see that bounding box that I was describing earlier. That's what you have to imagine when drawing a circular marquee around something. You have to imagine that box. Now, with the selection tool, I'm going to click and drag this layer onto the poster. And there it is. Now you'll notice it's highlighted in my layer list here. But in this group here, I've got a couple other things that are titled the exact same name but with a different number. So again, the importance is labeling things clearly as to what they are, and sometimes when you have duplicate items on the screen, you need to give a specific descriptor. So in this case, there's a little 4-point geometry in the center, so I'm going to call this mandala diamond. And we changed the name in the exact same fashion that we did initially. And now we can tell one layer from the next just by its title. You can use the numbers, but as you can see, it doesn't really give you any clear description as to which one it is. Now, if you ever lose a layer where you have it on your list but you're not sure where it is on the screen, you can always select that layer in the layer window, and Photoshop will draw a bounding box around the layer on your canvas. Now, each of these folders are considered a layer group. Now, the reason I recommend creating groups of layers is because you can begin to see how these modules function as an independent element. And if you're not working in that specific module, you don't really need to have all of this information expanded. Otherwise, you're sifting through all sorts of information about layers that maybe you don't even need to see at that time. So if I just want to work on this element down here, this piano keyboard, I want to be able to minimize all the other layers so that they're not taking up space in my layer window. So how do we do this? How do we create groups? Well, it's quite simple. I'm going to open up this Kaimat window here. Now let's say I wanted to take all of the text that was in this window here, and I wanted to put that in a folder so that I could group it together and minimize how many layers are being taken up on the screen here. So I'm going to shift and click, selecting the group of text. I'm going to come up here to the top right hand corner of my layers window, and I'm going to hit this button, and it's going to open up a little menu here, and we're going to select a new group from layers. We're given an opportunity to name the layer. Do so right away so that you know what you're going to call this group. And now all of our text is contained within this folder. I also have one for all of the images. And now we can minimize that even further and keep each of our modules accessible and visible at any given time. Now, when I talk about the importance of groups and organization, I want to draw your attention to this specific group, the cymatic keyboard. That contains all of the piano elements. Let me just get rid of everything else here so we can focus on that. So this layer group here contains over 100 layers just in itself. Now, to give you a little background of the cymatics project itself, what I'm attempting to communicate here is that there is sort of an alphabet to these patterns, each one specific to a frequency. And as the amplitude increases, it raises the complexity of each of those patterns. But the patterns are specific for each note. And what I'm demonstrating here took a lot of photographic patience. I'm going to bring up my catalog here just to show you note for note. I had a chromatic scale. I had note for note organized the chromatic scale and each of the patterns that develop at different amplitudes. So some of these, as I sift through, so I had all of this data that was already organized into folders, all of these images. So what I began to do was to copy and translate each of those images. I took the best 5 of each folder and created an independent layer in Photoshop and then grouped them according to what pitch they were. So what ends up happening is I copy in all of these layers into layer groups just like I had them organized in my Finder window. And what I'm able to do then is drag each one of these into the poster itself, and then having to manipulate the poster as a whole was another layer of challenges. Really what was the saving grace in the end was the utilization of the Fibonacci spirals. As you can see, a lot of these lines carry over and down and sort of dictate the overall shape and geometry of the large scale picture. And then within each of those windows or modules, there's even further divisions, just like over here with the software icons, the programs that I used, and my images of the hardware setup. So once I had everything laid out and all of my images collected, it came time to prepare this project to be printed. So first of all, we want to create a flattened version. What we're going to start out by doing is saving a copy. So now that we have this copy here, it's the same exact thing with all of our layers. I'm going to come up to my layers menu again, and I'm going to flatten this image. And what that's going to do is get rid of anything that's hidden. It's going to take all of the layers and text and put them onto one collective layer. And now that I have this flattened, I can save it as poster for print. And I just want to make sure that my format is set to PDF, Photoshop PDF. And I'm going to save that. Make sure your compatibility goes back far enough that whoever's printing it for you can print it. You want to make sure that there are no editing capabilities allowed. We're sending this to print, so we want to make sure that there's no chance of anything being edited or changed. And then we're going to save this as a PDF. And then once the PDF has completed saving, you have a file that is ready to take to print. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your projects.